Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'm talking to Mike Galsworthy of the European Movement UK about the way Labour have really hit the ground running on repairing our relationships with the EU, as David Lammy headed off immediately to Germany, Poland, and Sweden to showcase our complete about turn on attitudes to our European friends and neighbours. And a Minister for European Relations was appointed and immediately got in touch with the EU Commission Deputy President Maros Shevchovich. So the first thing, there's been lots of very exciting things. Labour have been getting straight to work. David Lammy was made Foreign Secretary on Friday. By Saturday, he was in Germany watching the football game with the German Foreign Minister. Then yesterday, he was off to Poland first and then Sweden. He even met the Swedish Prime Minister along with the Swedish Foreign Minister. So he's made good on his word that his top foreign policy priority is the EU. He'd said that before. When he said that some time ago, I sat up and took notes. I thought, because our foreign policy priority has always been the United States of America in living memory. And this was the first time we were going to get a foreign secretary who said, actually, no. And partly that could be, just because we haven't actually damaged relationships with America, but we have damaged relationships with Europe. Nick Thomas Simmons has been made a minister with multiple briefs, but one of them being European relations. And his first act today, he said, was to ring up Maros Shevchovich, who's the deputy EU commissioner, who had to deal with the likes of David Frost and Liz Truss. So there's been a lot of very quick movement. And David Lammy, as Foreign Secretary, we want lots of things, lots of agreements with the EU. His particular focus is security, lots of types of security. He said cybersecurity, better coordination with Ukraine, migration issues, like the whole works. But he's also said that he wants not a legally binding agreement, specifically because that would take years to negotiate, which is surely a sign that Labour recognised the need to reverse our divergent attitude to the EU, and really quickly. So what are your thoughts on that?
I agree on all of that. David Lammy has been straight out of the traps like a greyhound. He obviously had it all planned before. Obviously couldn't go by France but he's already covered a lot of bases in France after he released his piece on progressive realism. He then went and got interviewed in France on La Doctrine Lamy, and where he expanded upon it. So he's been reaching out, and he also very artfully saw that Sunak wasn't going to stay the full time on the Normandy beaches, and made sure that he and Keir Starmer got over there. So he has been chomping at the bit to really get out there and make good on all of that. And as to your point that it's clearly prioritized Europe and the EU over the States, one reason is Ukraine. Another one is not spoiling or trying to quickly repair the relationship that had been so badly trashed by previous governments. But another one is there is a risk of Trump coming in. And so with that in mind, he had already been working on the French to try and rebuild that Anglo-French relationship, because Europe is going to have to be strong if America goes doolally, whichever way you look at it, it's got a high chance of doing. So he has been good on that, but also with Nick Thomas Simmons, that is an interesting move that, as you say, has gone straight onto the Europe part of his brief. Paymaster General isn't much, is it? And then Minister for the Constitution, we have been debating what that actually means in terms of how much of a brief that is,
Yeah,
and
it
whether
usually
that
takes a
actually,
while for the responsibility. The responsibilities will be published in time on the website, but it often
yeah.
takes a little while to get that, especially when you've got a complete change of government.
So it's going to be interesting to know what that agenda is and how much time that will take up. But yeah, I think he was the shadow trade secretary
Yeah.
before, wasn't he?
He's actually been in Europe quite a lot, Nick Thomas Sims. He's already been developing relationships.
Yeah. And so it looks like he's likely to be continuing with David Lammy. I mean, if you look at how the shadow cabinet was, it's pretty much transferred through to government with a
Mm,
few tweaks and a few
yeah.
extra additions. So I think they're keen to get their machinery going well on Europe. And I think you also see that from Keir Starmer. Yes, they still sing up their red lines, but when you look at how quickly they're moving, you also realize they do actually have a lot of ground to cover in order to get into a position where they're taken seriously and they're trusted partners, and that's what they're working fast on
Mm,
rebuilding. Now, to come to Dave Lammy's strategy overall, there are kind of two strands to it. Firstly, there's this defense and security pact. And then, secondly, there's the trade improvements. Now, we know that on the defense and security stuff, this is where the UK is really, really valuable.
mm,
And it's obvious that they're hoping that by developing this and throwing it all in there, being really trusted and supportive and generous there, then they'll get more on the trade side of things. You talk to European operators about that, and they'll say, no,
yeah.
security and trade entirely separate. But we all know that the way things work in reality is there's a lot more horse trading. But with the security and defense, there's a lot more overlap between the both of them than people realize. And it's been a very clever move on Lammy's part to talk about security and defense because, one, it geopolitically repositions us. This is really important in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of Europe, and in the eyes of our own voter base. It's like, right, this is where we're moving now to be buddies with the EU. But then also within the security thing, you've got the urgent, visceral aspect of the threat of Putin,
Yeah.
not just the hardware coming in from the East, but also the cyber security and the other on the ground threats that come with it, disruption. We've already seen Putin poison people in our soil
Yeah.
and try to take down big systems. But then also within security, you've got climate change and mass movements of migration
Mm,
that can increasingly associated with climate change or with wars. You've also got consumer protections around chemicals and water pollution, air pollution, quality of life, on various other aspects of online security too. There is a lot that you can bundle into
yeah.
common security frameworks, and it means that that starts getting into the standardizations and the common monitorings that also underpin a lot of what the EU want to see
Yeah.
with regard to trade. So the structuring of it and the sequencing of it is looking quite clever. Within the trade thing, they can already make movements on things that the EU already offered to previous governments with movement of musicians, mutual recognitions of qualifications, data flows, things like that. So you can see how it all can develop. And what the Labour government is saying at the moment is that we want to have the trade and improve the relations without triggering the constitutional lines. And then this comes back to the Security Pact. I remember I had a discussion with Anand Menon of UK and a Changing Europe about this. And he was like, yeah, Mike, but what's going to be the meat of it? What's going to be the structure? And I said, I don't care. I don't give a flying doodly doo. I said because the main purpose of it is optics. It's signaling to the world that Brexit, as it has been, is a geopolitically silly and disadvantageous place to be in. We need to realign with Europe, and the most visceral, important daily life thing to realign on is the fundamentals of security, internationally and domestically. And so the fact that Lamy is now saying that he doesn't want to get tied up in all the legals and just wants to have that demonstration of good faith and cooperation. I'm very happy, because that's precisely how I was thinking that the whole dynamics of it need to be presented to everyone who's looking.
So what do you think then? So in terms of timing of this, so Labour are seeking like urgent changes really quickly, and we know why that is. I was discussing this before we came on. I'll just throw something out there for anyone else who hasn't noticed. So Cornwall, which voted for Brexit by a higher proportion than nationally, and in 2015, 2017 and 2019 returned 100% Tory MP. So every constituency in Cornwall was a Conservative MP through the general elections that took place before we left the EU. But Cornwall were particularly badly screwed by Brexit. Whether how many they realise it or not, I don't know. But they were very, quite a poor area, very reliant on EU development funding, which perhaps people didn't realise. And that EU development funding was not matched by the UK, or not even close to matched by the UK government. And now the first post-Brexit general election, they've gone from 100% of Conservative MPs to 0 Conservative MPs. So that shows you that whether, and I don't know how many people in Cornwall were consciously realising that Brexit's been on the arse, or they just saw the effects of it without the link. But it does show that they're not going to take having a government that, for whatever reason, has screwed them over. And that, can be part of the reason why Labour want to move on this very quickly, because they understand they're going to have to deliver real improvements to people. But just in terms of the timing here, so although David Lammy has been talking to foreign ministers, and he will continue to, and indeed we're hosting the Macron's brainchild, the political community meeting next week, I think it is, in Oxfordshire. But ultimately, a lot of this is going to require discussions with the EU Commission, and the EU Commission as it exists now is not going to exist this autumn. So is there a slight awkwardness in timing, do you think?
Well, lots to unpack there. What you said about Cornwall is also very true of Wales, where there is now no Conservative MP in Wales. And with both regions, you had previously the European structural funds, the regional funds, reliably, stably underpinning those regions, reliable money that, our local administrators could apply for, could get, knew that it was going to be there long term. And what happens when you pull that money saying, this is our money, we can do that ourselves? What you swiftly find is that it all comes back to the short-termism of government. The money's available if we're in the mood now, but we don't know whether we'll be in the mood later. You certainly can't rely on this in 5 years or 10 years' time if there's a change of government. And so for those regions, they could actually see that what they took for granted and thought would still be theirs for granted because it was their money was delayed, was cut down, was not prioritized, was difficult to get at. And so I think they've had quite a rude awakening as to competence that they took for granted versus the real risks of an incompetent, over-centralized government. In terms of the timings with the Commission and all the rest, I think that, like with the Lamy declaration about you don't need legal frameworks. It's something that they don't need to get tied into a lot of the complex commission stuff early on. There's a few bits of low-hanging fruit which they can grab quickly, such as veterinary deal, such as deal for musicians and other artists touring, that are pretty much largely prepped because they were worked up before and offered to the UK before. With musician and touring artists, for example, this was something that was offered to the UK. David Frost rejected it. He actually rejected it, and then later regretted rejecting it and was putting out posts saying so. He said, I think the words were, maybe we had been over purist. But because the previous government was so keen to shut down all binds with Europe beyond the bare necessities, and they didn't want to have bridges that could be built upon, they did go too far. And that means that in the pendulum swinging back, there are some real freebies on the way to pick up. And I think this government can pick those up while it waits for a new commission to get settled in. But remember, the commission is going to be under the instruction of the member states. So warming up all the member states that we've got a good ally here that we really need, and they've really got our back on security matters, and they're not causing us problems anymore. Can we give these guys a bit of a break? I think is the strategy.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the performers because, of course, Elton John threw his backing behind Labour, and he's been very vocal on the need for performers to have some sort of deal. Because obviously he's able to tour. He's a large operation. He's well used to it. But small performers, I mean, I keep seeing stories of people who organise, just a band that will go and play in a pub somewhere. And they're really popular. They can make a lot of money. Only it's too difficult to do so for smaller operators now. And it's a huge loss of productivity. Just something as simple as that. People have just understated just how easy it was for a performer to just disappear to the Netherlands or to Belgium or someone like that, do a few pubs, even just small venues where they could make money, and now it's too much hassle if they can even get all the permissions in time.
Yeah, and that's gigging bands, but it opens up to when you have large operations and you need your whole tech team, or when people are going over and DJing, or when you've got classical music and you're trying to lug some big equipment, or even if you're actors and performers that usually do touring gigs as well. All of that, all of our cultural exchange that we're putting out there gets dried up. Sales as well. But here's another thing that not a lot of people have commented on, and that is a lot of them, we know because we've talked a lot, are breaking the law all over the place, and their nerves are shot because in order to keep going what they've been doing before, they've been hiding things or trying to get round some of the time restrictions through using maybe two passports or other different ways of tricking the system. But to force people to be illegal in order to do such nice and open and healthy culture, it's ridiculous. But that's the kind of people that situation that's forcing people to go and do those kind of things because it isn't being resolved in the current environment, and people are either giving up or they're living with their hearts in their mouths as they try and make a living the way they used to.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can see the reason why Labour will want to get on this really quickly, and it looks like they absolutely have done it. In the case of two ministers, there will be other secretaries of state, of course, who also need to get in on this. I mean, it'll be DEFRA's job to deal with the SPS agreement that we want. Would it be the Department for Trade that would deal with the
Yes, I think we
performers?
always need to spell out what that is, because otherwise it's just an acronym which will
Yeah.
bamboozle
So
most people.
basically
So
a veterinary agreement.
phytosanitary,
Yeah.
so it's animal health and plant health. So since Brexit came in, essentially, if you want to catch lobsters and send them across the waters to restaurants, it used to be just kind of like catch them, you get the phone call, you say, yeah, I can get that to you by lunchtime, send it off. Now you need a health certificate on that. So the number of vets and health certificators, or whatever you would call it, the demand on having those has expanded. And for them to actually get those certificates in time to actually
Yeah.
provide fresh fruit just in time is being a massive barrier. So if there is a way of guaranteeing similar standards and having a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement that covers that and takes away the red tape,
Yeah.
then that's massively beneficial.
Yeah. So all very encouraging, but if you want to add your voice of encouragement, what to do? Well, you can either become a Steve Brakelow, get a small team to build up a big voice, but not everyone can do that, and not everyone who can wants to do that, in which case, add yourself to a much larger team. The more members of groups like the European Movement have, the bigger their clout when engaging with a government that actually wants to deal with real solutions. You get to claim we represent X number of people, or X plus 1,000 number of people, or 100,000 or 1,000,000 people. Right? And if you can't afford to take on the membership, because that applies to some people, remember you can still sign up to the newsletter for free to keep yourself informed about what's going on in your area, as well as nationally and internationally. Help connect you with others as well. It's all about making that voice louder. The last few years was a time of government that would never going to listen. We had 1,000,000 people marching for a people's vote in 2019. The government were never listening to that. That's changed. You might not believe it yet, but that has changed. Time to start having your voice heard. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.